My name is Clara. I'm 68 years old. And what I'm about to tell you will make you think twice before trusting your own children. I never thought my own son, the boy I carried in my arms, the boy whose fever I stayed up all night to watch over, would one day turn me out of my own home. But life has a cruel way of revealing what people truly are when money and property get involved. I lived most of my life in a small, peaceful town on the edge of a quiet countryside. My husband, Robert, built our little white house with his own hands more than 40 years ago. Every brick, every nail, every piece of wood carried his love and effort. It wasn't a grand house, but it was ours. It stood surrounded by a garden that I tended every morning, the smell of jasmine and lavender in the summer, the sound of sparrows landing on the fence, the feeling of sunlight warming my old wooden porch. That house was my heart. Every room held a memory. The kitchen still echoed with the laughter of my husband as he teased me about burning toast. The living room was where we used to dance to old records on rainy days. Even the creaky stairs reminded me of the nights our little boy, Daniel, would run down in his pajamas because he'd had a nightmare and needed to sleep between us. Daniel was our only child. From the moment he was born, we poured everything we had into him. Our time, our money, our love. Robert worked long hours at the factory, and I took up sewing for the neighbors to make ends meet. We never had much, but we made sure Daniel never went without. He was bright, ambitious, and so full of dreams. He used to say, "One day, Mom, I'll buy you a big house. You'll never have to lift a finger again." I used to smile and tell him that all I needed was for him to be happy. When Robert passed away 5 years ago, Daniel and his wife, Melissa, became my only family. They lived about 40 minutes away in the city. Melissa was polite, always smiling, though I could sense she didn't quite like how close Daniel and I were. I tried not to mind it. Young people, after all, have their own ways. Daniel would visit every few weeks, mow the lawn, fix whatever was broken, and we'd have dinner together. Those moments meant everything to me. As I got older, paperwork and bills became harder to manage. I started forgetting small things, like where I put my reading glasses or when the electricity bill was due. Daniel noticed, and one evening he said, "Mom, you shouldn't be worrying about all this. Why don't we put the house in my name? That way, if something happens to you, it'll be safe. No government nonsense. No trouble." I hesitated. The house was my life, but he was my son. I trusted him completely. He was kind, successful, and always spoke with confidence. "It's just a formality," he said. "You'll still live here as long as you want. Nothing changes. Mom, it's just paperwork." I remember sitting at the kitchen table that night, staring at the old photo of Robert on the wall. I could almost hear his voice saying, "He's our boy. Clara, he won't hurt you." So I agreed. The following week, Daniel brought some documents. He'd already arranged everything. He said it would make things easier for me. I didn't read much of it. My eyes weren't what they used to be, and truthfully, I didn't feel the need. I trusted my son more than anyone else in the world. I signed the papers where he told me to, smiling as I handed the pen back to him. He hugged me afterward and said, "You'll never have to worry about a thing again, Mom." And I believed him. The first few days after that were the same as always. I watered my plants, watched my shows, cooked small meals for myself. But something in Daniel's voice began to change. He stopped calling as often. When I phoned him, Melissa would usually answer, sounding distant, saying they were busy. One morning I found an envelope slipped under my door. It was a notice, something about property ownership and occupancy rights. I didn't understand it, so I called Daniel, but he didn't answer. I tried again that evening. Nothing. For the first time in my life, I felt a pit in my stomach, a quiet unease I couldn't shake. When I handed him those papers, I thought I was securing our family's future. I didn't know I was signing away my own. At first, nothing seemed different. Daniel still came by on weekends, sometimes with Melissa, though the visits felt shorter than before. He would spend more time on his phone, answering work calls or scrolling, while I tried to tell him about the garden or a new recipe I'd tried. Melissa, on the other hand, would sit quietly, sipping her coffee, her eyes moving slowly over the furniture, the curtains, the pictures on the wall. "It's a lovely place," she said once, smiling faintly. "A little old-fashioned, but cozy." I laughed and told her it had always been that way, ever since her husband was a little boy running through the hallway. But she didn't laugh with me. She just nodded. Over the next few weeks, Daniel's tone began to change, barely noticeable at first. "Mom, you shouldn't be climbing ladders anymore," he said when I tried to clean the windows. "You shouldn't be cooking so much," he'd add when I invited them for dinner. He used to say these things with concern, but now it sounded more like orders. When I mentioned that I was thinking of repainting the porch, he frowned. "Let's not do anything right now, Mom. I've got plans for the place. It needs proper renovation. Plans for the place." The word stung a little, but I brushed it off. Maybe he was just being responsible. Maybe he wanted to make improvements like his father once did. A few days later, I called him to ask if he'd like to visit on Sunday. Melissa answered. "Oh, Clara," she said sweetly. "We're actually really busy this weekend. Daniel's been working so hard, and we barely get any time to ourselves. Maybe next week." I said that was fine. But the next week came and they didn't call. The house began to feel quieter than usual. The evenings stretched long, with only the ticking of the old clock and the sound of wind brushing against the window. I started talking to Robert's photograph again, just to fill the silence. "He's probably just busy," I whispered. "They have their own lives." One Friday afternoon, Daniel showed up without warning. He didn't hug me this time. He stood in the doorway, his face serious. "Mom, can we talk?" My heart sank a little, but I smiled. "Of course, sweetheart. What's wrong?" He looked around before sitting down. "I've been thinking, this place is getting a bit too much for you to manage. It's big, old, and frankly not very safe. You'd be better off in a smaller place, maybe a retirement community, where you'll have people around, meals provided, doctors nearby." I laughed nervously. "Oh, Daniel, I don't need that yet. I'm fine here. This house is all I have." He didn't smile. "Mom, it's not about what you want. It's about what's practical." Practical. The word hit me harder than I expected. "But Daniel," I said softly, "this is my home. Your father and I—" He interrupted. "It's not about sentiment, Mom. It's about what makes sense. The place needs repairs, and I can't manage that while you're still living here." My throat tightened. "I thought you said nothing would change when I gave you the papers." He sighed and rubbed his forehead. "Things change, Mom. You have to trust me on this." I tried to hold his hand, but he stood up before I could. "Just think about it, okay?" And then he left. That night I couldn't sleep. The house felt colder somehow, as if it already knew what was coming. The next week, a man came to the door. He was polite, wearing a suit, holding a clipboard. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm here to take measurements for the upcoming renovations." I told him there must be some mistake. But he smiled awkwardly and said, "Mr. Daniels told me to start with the living room." Mr. Daniels, he didn't even call him my son. I called Daniel immediately, but he didn't pick up. Melissa texted later saying, "Don't worry, Clara, it's all part of the plan." I didn't reply. I sat on the porch that evening, watching the sun go down behind the trees, feeling smaller than I ever had. The next morning, I found an envelope taped to my front door. My hands trembled as I tore it open. It was an official-looking letter with words I could barely process. Vacate. Property owner's rights. 30 days. My heart pounded as I dialed Daniel's number. He answered after a few rings, sounding tired. "Daniel," I whispered, "what is this? Is this some mistake?" There was a long silence. Then he said quietly, "Mom, it's time. You need to move out. Melissa and I have decided." I couldn't breathe. "Move out? Daniel, this is my home. Your father built this with his hands. You grew up here." "I know, Mom," he said, his voice distant, "but it's not your house anymore." I stood there in my own living room, holding the paper with trembling hands, realizing I was no longer welcome in the house I built. The days after that conversation felt like a blur. I kept hoping Daniel would call, that he'd realize what he was doing, that this was all just some terrible misunderstanding. But the silence stretched on. I tried calling him again and again, leaving voicemails he never returned. Finally, I took the bus into the city, clutching the eviction notice in my purse. When I reached his apartment, Melissa opened the door. She looked surprised, maybe even annoyed. "Clara, what are you doing here?" I said softly. "I need to talk to my son." She crossed her arms. "He's at work." "He's busy, Clara. You can't just show up like this." Her voice had a sharp edge to it. No warmth, no kindness. "Please," I said. "Just tell him I came to see him." Tell him I need to understand why. She sighed and looked away. You signed the house over, didn't you? He's just doing what's best for everyone. You should be grateful he's handling things. You can't live alone forever. I could feel tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall in front of her. Grateful? I whispered. For losing everything I've ever loved. She didn't answer. She simply closed the door. That sound, the click of it, echoed in my chest like a heartbeat breaking. I stood in the hallway for a long time, clutching my bag, staring at the door that separated me from my own child. When I finally walked away, the world outside felt heavier than before. That evening, I went to see an old friend, Margaret, who'd known Daniel since he was a boy. When I told her what happened, she gasped. Clara, he can't do that. You're his mother. I shook my head. He can. I signed everything. The lawyer says the house is legally his now. Her eyes softened. You were just trying to protect him. Yes, I whispered, staring at my hands. And in doing so, I destroyed myself. The next few days, I tried to reason with Daniel one last time. I called him and said, Daniel, can we meet? Please, I just want to talk. One mother to her son. He agreed to come over. When he arrived, he didn't sit down. He just stood there in the living room, glancing at his watch. I could barely recognize him. His eyes were colder, his voice distant. Mom, I know this is hard for you, but it's for the best. You'll have a smaller place, less to worry about. Less to worry about? I said, trying to steady my voice. This isn't about worry, Daniel. It's about love. It's about everything we built here. Your father's laughter. Your first steps. The life we made. He sighed. Mom, please don't make this harder. I'm not trying to make it harder, I said, tears filling my eyes. I'm trying to make you remember. He looked away. Melissa and I already made arrangements. We've listed the property. You listed it? I whispered. While I'm still here? It's done, Mom. Please just accept it. I stared at him, searching for the boy I used to know. The boy who would run into my arms after scraping his knee. The boy who once said, Mom, when I grow up, I'll take care of you forever. Where had that boy gone? I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. He walked out before I could say another word. That night, I sat on the floor surrounded by boxes. I began to pack slowly, one item at a time. My hands trembled as I touched each thing. The chipped blue mug Robert used every morning. The old quilt my mother had sewn when I married. The photo of Daniel on his 5th birthday, his face covered in chocolate. I pressed the picture to my chest and finally let the tears fall. Why, Daniel? I whispered into the empty room. Why did you turn your back on me? The walls stayed silent. The house felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for me to go. When morning came, I folded my last sweater and closed the final box. My body felt heavy, but my heart even heavier. I walked through each room one last time, touching the walls, whispering goodbye. In the hallway, I stopped at Robert's photo. I could almost hear his voice again, soft, gentle, full of warmth. You'll be all right, Clara. You've always been strong. I smiled weakly. I tried, Robert. I really tried. As I turned toward the door, I saw an envelope slipped under it, my name written in Daniel's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a short note. Mom, I'm sorry. Please don't make this harder. Melissa found a buyer already. I'll help you move next week. I dropped the letter. My knees gave out and I sat on the floor, staring at the walls that had once heard laughter, songs, and love. Now, they echoed only with emptiness. I took one last look around, feeling the air grow still. Then I picked up my coat and stepped outside. As I closed the door behind me, I realized the sound of the lock clicking wasn't just the end of a home, it was the end of a mother's heart. The weeks that followed were the hardest of my life. I moved in with my old friend Margaret for a while. She insisted, said she wouldn't hear of me staying anywhere else. Her house was small but warm, and she made tea every evening, the way I used to. I helped her in the garden, cooked dinner for the two of us, and tried to keep my mind busy. But at night, when everything went quiet, I would lie awake and see the old house in my dreams. The porch bathed in golden light, the smell of fresh bread from the oven, the sound of Robert humming while fixing something in the shed. Some mornings I woke up thinking I was still there, and then the truth would hit me again. I'd lost my home. I'd lost my son. The pain didn't come in loud waves. It came quietly, like a dull ache that never left. I thought of calling Daniel so many times, but I never did. I wanted to believe that someday he would realize what he'd done and come looking for me. Weeks turned into months. I found a small apartment on the edge of town, just 2 rooms and a balcony. The walls were bare at first, but I started filling them with plants and little things that made me feel alive again. I even hung up Robert's photograph by the window, where the morning light could reach it. Slowly, life began to feel peaceful again. Not the same peace I once had, but a new kind. Quieter, lonelier, yet somehow freer. One afternoon I went to the market and overheard 2 women talking. "Did you hear about that big house on Maple Lane?" One of them said. "The new owners backed out. Apparently the sale fell through. Something about unpaid taxes or debt." My heart skipped. Maple Lane? That was my street, my house. That evening, I asked Margaret to drive me past the old neighborhood. When we turned the corner, I saw it. My home. Standing just as I remembered, but different somehow. The garden was overgrown, the paint chipped, the for sale sign leaning crooked in the yard. I sat there in silence, staring through the car window. "It's falling apart," Margaret said softly. "They didn't take care of it." I smiled sadly. "No," I said, "because it wasn't built with money. It was built with love. And once you take that away, a house becomes just wood and stone." A few weeks later, Daniel called. I hadn't heard his voice in months. He sounded broken. "Mom, can we talk?" For a long moment, I didn't say anything. Then I heard him sniffle. "Melissa left," he said quietly. She sold her share and took the money. I lost everything. The house, the savings, everything. I closed my eyes, letting the silence settle. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. "I don't know what I was thinking. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was protecting us." "Protecting us?" I said softly. "You forgot the one thing that needed protecting most. Your heart." He began to cry, really cry, the way he hadn't since he was a boy. For a moment, I almost reached through the phone to hold him, to tell him everything would be all right. But I knew that wasn't my place anymore. Pain has a way of teaching what love cannot. "I forgive you, Daniel," I said finally. "Not because what you did was right, but because I don't want to carry hate with me. It's too heavy." He sobbed on the other end. "I don't deserve it. Maybe not," I said. "But I need to be free." When I hung up, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not joy, not sadness, just release. That night I sat on my small balcony looking at the stars. The city lights shimmered in the distance, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I thought about Robert, about the life we built, about the laughter that once filled that old house. None of it was really gone. It lived in me, in my memories, in the lessons, in the love that even betrayal couldn't erase. A few months later, I started volunteering at a local shelter for elderly women who'd lost their homes. Some had stories like mine, some even worse. We'd sit together over cups of tea, sharing pain, sharing hope. Helping them helped me heal. I realized something important. A home isn't just walls and a roof. It's kindness, safety, and love. Things no one can ever take from you. One evening, as I locked my little apartment and prepared for bed, I caught my reflection in the window. My face had more lines now, my hair more gray, but my eyes, they were calm, peaceful. I smiled to myself. "You did it, Clara," I whispered. "You survived." As I turned off the light, I felt a deep, quiet strength settle inside me. A house can be stolen, but a mother's peace cannot. I may have lost my home, but I found something far greater. Freedom.